Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on a service call the day the first emergency alert hit my phone. I remember it exactly because I was halfway up a utility pole on the edge of town, tightening a bracket on a fibre line that always sagged after storms. It was a Tuesday morning, late fall, cool enough that my breath showed when I exhaled. Our town, Elkins, sat tucked along the Tygart Valley River in West Virginia, just a couple of miles from the treeline that led into Monongahela National Forest. From where I worked, I could see the tops of the ridges already turning dark with pines. The kind of hills that swallowed radio signals, people who did not know what they were doing. The phone vibrated in my chest pocket. I clamped the wrench to the bracket and let it hang so I had a free hand. The screen lit up with the bright red banner I had only seen in weather drills and once when they tested the system a year back. National Emergency Alert. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with aggressive individuals. Follow local broadcasts for updates. The wording was vague enough that my first thought was some kind of riot or chemical leak. Then I heard sirens, not one or two, but a rolling wave of them from downtown Elkins. I looked over the rooftops toward Davis Avenue and Railroad Avenue and watched a column of black smoke starting to rise. My boss, Carl, was parked at the base of the pole, leaning against the service truck with a clipboard on his hood. He looked down at his phone, then up at me and shook his head. "You see this?" he called up. "Yeah, you ever seen one like that?" "No," he said. "Get down, we're heading in." I came down the gaffs fast, unhooked my belt, and tossed the tool bag into the back seat of the Ford F-250 service truck. We left the job half finished, the fibre line still sagging just enough to bother me. That irritation only lasted until we hit the first intersection and saw what was really happening. Two police cruisers were angled across the road near the hospital entrance, lights flashing but sirens off. One of them was empty, doors open. The other had a paramedic leaning against the trunk, hands braced, trying to catch his breath. Half a block down, people were running in different directions. No clear line of movement, no evacuation order, just scattered panic. As we idled, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a link from my younger brother Mark, who lived over the state line near Pittsburgh. "Turn on the news, it's real." I tapped the radio over to a local AM news station. The host's voice was shaky. Multiple reports now across Randolph and surrounding counties of individuals exhibiting violent, unprovoked behavior. Law enforcement is overwhelmed. Citizens are advised to stay indoors and avoid any contact with those who appear disoriented, injured, or unresponsive. Carl cursed under his breath, a quiet, controlled sound. He had been a lineman for 30 years, seen floods, storms, and one bridge collapse. I had never seen him look like he did then. "Drop me at my place," I said. "You should get home too." "You saw the alert," he answered. "They want people to stay off the roads. Then we better move before they close them." We made it 4 blocks before the traffic locked up. A sedan had jumped the curb and was half on the sidewalk in front of a pharmacy. 3 people were on the ground nearby. 2 more were crouched over them, moving in a way I did not understand at first. Then one of the people on the ground started to thrash, not like someone in pain, but like someone trying to get up while being held down. Carl swore again and threw the truck into reverse. "We're going around," he said. "This is insane." I watched the side mirror. One of the crouched figures turned toward us. His face was pale, jaw slack, eyes wide open in a fixed stare that did not look right. His clothes were stained from something I tried not to think about in detail. When he started to move in our direction, I reached over and hit the lock button for all 4 doors. "This is not just a fight," I said. "No," Carl replied, voice flat. "It's not." We cut through side streets, using every back route we knew from years of driving around downed lines and washed out pavement. The radio kept up a constant stream now, reports from Buckhannon, Philippi, even out toward Clarksburg. It was the same pattern. People taken to hospitals with strange symptoms, then the hospitals going quiet, then calls about people getting back up after they should not be moving at all. Something's wrong with the numbers, I said finally. This is too fast. They wouldn't shut things down for a few cases, Carl answered. This has been going on longer than they're saying. We reached my small rental house on the edge of town, near the tree line. I grabbed my go bag from the hall closet, a worn hiking pack I kept half ready out of habit. It already had a basic first aid kit, a water filter pump, space blanket, fire starter, spare batteries, a headlamp, tape, and a rolled-up topographic map of Monongahela National Forest. It took me 10 extra minutes to add clothes, some protein bars, a couple of bottles of water, and my old bolt-action rifle with a box of .30-06 cartridges. The rifle had been my father's. It was heavy, plain, and reliable. I stopped once to look out the front window. A delivery truck was parked crooked at the corner, driver's door open. I watched my neighbour, a retired teacher named Alan, standing on his porch with a phone to his ear. His wife was pulling him inside. They both looked terrified. I considered staying, boarding up the windows, waiting for authorities to get ahead of whatever this was. Then I remembered the hospital, the sirens, the emergency alert. I pictured people getting back up when they should not, and the way that man near the pharmacy had moved toward our truck with that fixed look in his eyes. Urban areas, even a small town like Elkins, had too many people and too many unknowns. The forest, at least, was predictable. I left a note on the kitchen table in case Mark somehow made it down. Heading into the Mon North side, same trails as Dad. We'll keep radio on Weather Channel and scan others. Stay alive. Ethan. I locked the door out of habit, even though I knew it would not stop anything serious. Then I got back in the truck and pulled away from the curb. Traffic on the road out of town was already thick. People were trying to get to relatives, stores, anywhere but where they were. News had spread faster than the official broadcasts. I cut away from the main route and took the smaller road that wound past Leedsville and out toward the forest access points. I knew from work where the lesser-used service roads were, the ones logging trucks and utility crews favoured. About 5 miles out, I saw the first real sign that things were not coming back to normal. A state trooper cruiser sat sideways across the road, hood crumpled where it had collided with another car. One of the doors hung open. The windshield was cracked from the inside. There was nobody in sight. The radio inside the cruiser was still squawking faintly. I eased the truck around it on the shoulder, careful not to get stuck in the ditch. As I did, something in the tree line caught my eye. Movement, not smooth like a deer, but jerky. I slowed for half a second and saw 3 people standing just inside the shadow of the pines, about 30 yards back. They wore ordinary clothes. One had a coat half hanging off his shoulder. All 3 were standing unnaturally still, heads tilted slightly toward the road. Their faces were wrong. The skin tone, the way their mouths hung, the lack of any real reaction to my engine noise. They watched the truck pass with a slow turning of their heads, like they were tracking the sound more than the vehicle. I did not stop to look closer. I pressed the accelerator and kept going. By the time I reached the turnoff to the service road that led toward the northern trailheads of Monongahela, cell service was gone. My last text from Mark had come 20 minutes earlier. Highways closing here. People getting attacked. If you're going into the woods, stay deep. Call when you can. I tried to call him back once. The call failed immediately. The graded gravel of the service road felt familiar under the tires. A rough washboard vibration through the steering wheel. Branches arched over the path in places, scraping the truck's roof. The forest rose up around both sides, dense and dark. A hand-painted sign, half rotted, warned about limited maintenance ahead. I drove until I hit a chain gate stretched across the road, padlocked and sagging slightly where someone had cut and rewired it in the past. I killed the engine and rolled down the window. The forest was quiet in a way I did not like. No birdsong, just the faint rustle of wind through needles. I sat there for a full minute, thinking. The truck was useful, It had tools, a full tank, and shelter from weather. It was also a big metal box that needed roads and fuel, and I knew the odds of coming back to it once I left were low. The forest, on the other hand, I understood. I had grown up hiking these hills with my father. He had taught me to read the contour lines on the map, to follow creeks, to move in ways that left few traces, and to respect the fact that the forest did not care whether you lived or died. Staying near town meant risking other people, and right now, other people were the biggest unknown variable. I climbed out of the truck, opened the toolbox, and did one last check. I took a compact camp stove, my small fixed blade knife, a coil of paracord, a roll of duct tape, a folding shovel, and a few basic hand tools, a hammer, a small pry bar, pliers. I added a spare flashlight and batteries. I slung the rifle over my shoulder, made sure the safety was on, and locked the truck. The chain gate was easy enough to bypass on foot. Beyond it, the road narrowed until it was more of a trail, with grass growing up the center and loose rocks scattered across the surface. After another half mile, it degenerated into nothing more than a pair of faint tire ruts from years back. I had a rough idea of where I wanted to go. The topographic map in my pack showed a network of ridges and drainages leading up into a less traveled section of the forest. There were old logging cuts up there, faintly marked, the kind of places that did not attract weekend hikers. I walked steadily, checking my compass every so often to confirm I was still heading roughly northeast. The air grew cooler under the thickening canopy. The smell of pine, damp soil, and decaying leaves was strong. It took about an hour before I heard the first distant sound behind me that was not wind. A shout, faint but sharp, carried on the air, then another, then something else, an indistinct roar, like many voices layered together at a distance. It rose and fell, not like a crowd at a game, but like something reacting to a trigger. I picked up my pace. The rifle strap bit into my shoulder. Sweat prickled under my jacket despite the cool air. By late afternoon, I had climbed enough that my legs burned. The forest had fully closed around me now. The old road was gone, replaced by deer trails and water runoff cuts that I followed uphill. The map showed a broad, flat shelf of land ahead, just below a steeper ridge, a likely place for a logging camp, if one had ever existed there. I crested a small rise, pushed through a stand of young spruce, and stopped dead. The cabin sat in a shallow clearing about 50 yards ahead. As if it had grown out of the forest itself, it was not on my map. I knew that section well enough to be sure. The structure was modest, maybe 20 by 30 feet, raised on concrete piers about 2 feet off the ground. The exterior walls were weathered wood siding, bleached grey. The roof was metal, dull from years of exposure, with a single stovepipe emerging from near the centre. A short set of wooden steps led up to a small porch and a solid-looking front door. I stood very still, listening. The clearing was quiet, no generator noise, no voices, no sign of vehicles. The grass around the cabin, such as it was, had grown unevenly, but not wildly. Someone had trimmed or stomped it down at some point in the last few months. On the far side of the cabin, partially obscured by brush, I saw the edge of a small shed. Next to it, mounted on a simple rack, were 2 solar panels angled toward the gap in the trees where the sun slipped through in the late afternoon. No visible smoke came from the stovepipe. No light showed in the single window facing me. My first thought was that I had lucked out, shelter, off the main paths, with an existing water and power setup. My second thought was that there might be someone inside who did not want company. I moved closer, staying off the main footpath that led to the steps. The ground was soft under the needles. Around the back, I found a narrow path leading downhill. It ended at a small circular area lined with stones and a hand pump rising from the center. I worked the handle once, slowly. There was resistance, then the sound of water moving. I let it go. I did not want the squeak of metal to advertise my presence yet. Returning to the front corner of the cabin, I stepped up to the outer wall and listened. Nothing, No floor creaks, no voices, no rustle of movement. I slung the rifle in front of me, kept it pointed down, and climbed the steps to the porch. The door was heavy, built of solid planks, with cross-bracing and a deadbolt. There were no obvious marks of forced entry. I tried the handle gently. Locked. That was both reassuring and concerning. Someone had cared enough to secure it. They could still be nearby. To the left of the door, under a small overhang, hung an old metal first aid box, the type you saw in workshops. It was closed, but not locked. I opened it, half expecting dust. Instead, I found a set of keys on a simple ring, a small flashlight, and a folded piece of paper. The keys were labelled with worn, hand-scratched letters. Cabin shed well. The paper had a few lines written on it in pencil. If you made it this far, and you're still thinking clearly, use the keys. Close the door behind you. Keep quiet after dark. If I'm here, we'll talk. If I'm not, read the notebooks and do not leave the clearing at night. No name, no date. I took a breath, picked up the key labelled cabin, and slid it into the deadbolt. It turned smoothly. The door opened inward with a soft creak. The interior smelled like old wood, dust, and something else. Disinfectant, maybe. The main room was a simple rectangle. To the right, a small kitchenette with a counter, a hand-pumped sink connected to an indoor catchment, a 2-burner propane stove, and a shelf with neatly stacked pots and pans. To the left, a heavy wood stove with a metal plate beside it for firewood. Straight ahead, a table with 2 chairs. On the far wall, a narrow door, likely leading to a small sleeping area or storage room. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and engaged the deadbolt. The cabin had clearly been used recently. A chipped enamel mug sat on the table, next to a folded map similar to mine, but marked up heavily in red pencil. A crate of canned goods was stacked under the counter. A pair of worn hiking boots sat neatly beside the door, as if the owner had intended to come back and put them on. But there was no sign of anyone currently living here. No jacket hanging on a chair, no pack ready by the door, no recent trash. I made a slow circuit of the room, checking corners and shadows. The small side door opened onto a narrow bunk room with a single bed, a built-in set of shelves, and a crate that looked like it might have once held communication equipment. The bed was unmade but not messy. The thin blanket was rumpled, pillows slightly indented, as if whoever had slept there had got up quickly and never returned. On the shelves were notebooks, 10 of them at least. They were numbered on their spines with black marker, 1 through 10. I reached up and took down notebook 1. The handwriting inside was firm and neat. The early entries were dated 8 months back. Arrived at cabin. Solar array functional after minor repairs. Pump at lower well still produces. This site is ideal for observing wildlife patterns away from the main trails. Minimal human activity. Good line of sight if brush is kept trimmed. The writer, whoever they were, had sketched small maps of the surrounding terrain, marked with notes about bear sightings, deer tracks, bird nests. The early notes felt like those of a field biologist or a naturalist. I flipped ahead. The tone shifted about halfway through the first notebook. 3 weeks since first news reports of violent incidents. Have not gone back to town. Shortwave reception intermittent. National broadcasts mention a contagion. Terms being used. Acute aggression, neurological damage, reanimation, unconfirmed. Later, tested observation. Individuals who have changed, infection assumed, follow sound and movement. They move in groups once they gather. They navigate uneven terrain slowly, but do not fall as often as first observed. There is a pattern to where they avoid. This clearing and immediate perimeter seem to fall in one such zone. Need more data. My stomach tightened. I set the notebook down and looked around the small room again, seeing it with fresh eyes. This was not just a random forgotten cabin. Someone had been using it as an observation post. I chose to believe, for the moment, that whoever had left the keys behind did not intend harm, and if they were gone, their preparations were the best chance I had. I did a quick inventory. The canned food under the counter amounted to maybe 3 weeks of calories if I rationed carefully. Beans, vegetables, canned meat, soup. There was a sack of rice, a jar of salt, and a box of oatmeal. In the cabinet under the sink, I found a simple water filter attached to the pump line, homemade, using layered sand, charcoal, and gravel. Next to it sat a separate pump filter of the type backpackers used, with replaceable cartridges. The wood box by the stove was half full. A larger stack of split logs was piled neatly outside along the cabin wall under an overhang. I checked the shed next. Inside I found what I had hoped for and what I feared. Tools, yes. Axes, a shovel, a bow saw, stacks of nails and screws in labelled jars. A gas-powered chainsaw hung on a rack, drained of fuel but otherwise intact. There was also a small portable generator, an older Honda unit, dusty but intact, and 2 5-gallon fuel cans. On the shelf opposite, covered with a cloth, lay a pump-action shotgun and a box of 12-gauge shells. Next to it, a compact hunting rifle with a scope and a partially used box of .308 cartridges. Nothing exotic. Practical, reliable tools for rural life and defense. I checked both firearms briefly, more out of habit than mistrust. Both were unloaded. Actions locked open. Safety engaged. Whoever had used them last had put them away responsibly. I closed the shed, locked it, and walked a slow circle around the clearing. The cabin sat slightly higher than the surrounding ground. The slope fell away in 3 directions, making it difficult to approach without climbing. The fourth side faced the small hill I had just come over. Trees pressed close in most directions, but someone had trimmed back enough branches to create narrow sightlines between trunks, out to about 50 yards. I could work with this. That first night, I made a simple decision. I stayed inside, kept the lights off, and listened. As darkness fell, the forest shifted. The faint chirr of insects rose briefly, then faded. The temperature dropped. The metal roof ticked as it cooled. Somewhere distant, a branch snapped loudly. I could not tell if it was wind or something stepping where it should not. I lay on the bunk, fully dressed, boots on, rifle within reach but set aside safely, and listened to the silence deepen. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke with a start to the distant sound of something moving in unison. It started as a murmur, a blend of footfalls and low, inhuman vocal noise, carrying through the trees in a way that made direction difficult to pin down. The sound grew slightly, then faded again, like a slow wave passing through the forest and moving on. It never came close to the clearing. I lay there in the dark, breathing shallowly, counting heartbeats until the noise was gone. Only then did I realize how tense my body had become. The writer of notebooks had not been imagining things. There was a pattern. In the morning, I started turning their camp into mine. First came the windows. The cabin had 3, one at the front, to the side of the door, one on each of the long walls, set high enough that you could not climb in easily, but still a weak point. The glass was old and thin. Behind the shed, leaning against a tree, I found a stack of rebar and some scavenged lumber. It looked like someone had hauled it up in stages. Using the saw and hammer, I built simple external shutters, thick panels that could swing down and be bolted into place over the windows from the inside. It took most of the day to get 2 of them hung and working. My hands were already tough from years of utility work, but by evening, new blisters were blooming at the base of my fingers. When the light started to fade, I locked the tools away, closed the shutters, and went back inside. That night, I heard the same distant movement again, a surge of noise, then nothing, always staying just beyond the clearing. On the second day, I dug. The soil around the cabin was a mix of dark humus and underlying clay, with roots everywhere. I used the folding shovel first, then switched to the full-size one from the shed. What I wanted was a shallow trench around the immediate perimeter, enough to make footing uncertain for anything approaching too fast. Not a ditch, just a low hazard that might trip someone or something that did not watch its feet. It was slow work. I paced myself, drinking often from the pump and filtering the water out of habit, even though the cabin system looked sound. By midday, sweat ran down my back despite the cool air. I stripped off my jacket and worked in my t-shirt. At one point, as I paused to catch my breath, I realized how quiet the forest still was. Too quiet. There were no birds scolding me for invading their space, no squirrels chattering. The only sounds were my own breathing, the scrape of metal on dirt, and the occasional creak of branches. I finished the basic trench before dark, circling the cabin in a shallow ring. It would not stop anything determined, but it added one more layer. Inside, by the dull light of a single battery lantern, I opened Notebook 4. The early ones had been mostly observations and supply logs. By Notebook 4, the writer had grown more focused on the phenomenon I had already started to suspect. Mornings, I worked on the cabin, finishing the third shutter, adding a bar to the door, and building a heavy crossbeam that could drop into brackets across it at night. I reinforced the porch railing and replaced a few rotten boards. I found rolls of old fiberglass insulation in the shed and used them, along with heavy blankets from the bunk room, to line the inside of the shutters and sections of the walls. The sound inside the cabin dropped noticeably once I had finished. Knocks and bumps were muffled, less likely to carry. Afternoons, I checked the perimeter. I followed the faint paths through the trees to the edge of what I guessed was the avoidance zone. I marked trees with small discrete cuts at about chest height, so I could identify the rough boundary even in poor light. On the third afternoon, I found the first clear sign of trouble. It was on the far side of the ridge, at the edge of a small ravine. A tangle of deadfall lay across a narrow game trail. On the near side of it, the ground was relatively undisturbed. On the far side, scuffed soil and broken branches showed where many feet had passed. I knelt and brushed away leaves. Human footprints, dozens of them, layered over each other, some deeper, some shallow. Sprinkled among them were drag marks, as if something had been pulled along. Further down the ravine, snagged on a branch, hung a strip of torn fabric, plaid like a flannel shirt, stiff and stained. Not far from it, half hidden under leaves, lay a backpack. I carefully unzipped it. Inside, I found a few protein bars, a small flashlight, a half-empty water bottle, and a photo in a Ziploc bag. A family picture. A man, a woman, 2 kids, all smiling at the camera in front of what looked like a lake. No name, no identifying information. I put everything back except the flashlight. I needed that more than a photo I could not deliver. I left the pack where it was as a marker. It reminded me that the forest was not empty. Nights were for listening and reading. By the end of the week, I'd worked through all 10 notebooks. The writer, whose name I eventually found once in a hurried signature, Dr. L. Harper, had been some sort of field researcher. Their background was in ecology and behavioral science. They had arrived at the cabin before the outbreak became public, contracted through a state program to monitor wildlife in the region. When the early incidents began, they stayed, using the cabin as both refuge and observation post. Their tone changed from analytical to strained over time. Week 5 since initial reports, infected behavior increasingly organized. They are not reasoning in the traditional sense, but they respond to stimuli and learn simple patterns. Avoidance zones remain consistent, cabins still untouched, tested direct presence at perimeter. They did not cross, but they watched me. They know I'm inside the boundary. Later, week 7, supply runs too dangerous. Shortwave suggests spread is global. Little mention of rural areas now, focus on remaining cities. I'm likely alone in this sector. My work is now just a personal survival plan and an attempt to understand why this place is different. And then, near the end of Notebook 10, I'm not sick yet, no fever, no confusion. If I do become ill, I will not remain near the cabin. This place needs to stay clear. There is something about it that holds them back. If anyone finds this and is still in control of themselves, they must treat the clearing as a resource, not a battleground. Too many bodies here might change everything. The last entry was short. Heard voices beyond ridge, human. They sound desperate and loud. They're heading in the direction of the boundary. I have to go intercept. If I don't come back, the keys are in the box. There were faint smudges on that page, the kind that happen when someone closes a notebook too quickly after writing. That explained the empty boots by the door, and why nobody had used the bed since. I found the blood the next afternoon, not in the cabin, but at the far edge of the avoidance zone, near where the forest thickened into a wall of brambles. It was old, dried to a dark, flaking stain on the bark of a tree and the rocks nearby. Not a splash, but a smear, as if someone had been dragged or had leaned heavily while moving past. No bodies, no clothing, just that one patch. I imagined Harper trying to steer a group away quietly, to keep them from blundering into the zone, yelling and triggering a massive response. Maybe it had worked, maybe it had not. I did not dwell too long on guesses. The forest had taken them, one way or another. On the 9th day, I met the first living person I had seen since leaving town. It was early afternoon. I was on the slope above the cabin, checking a line of simple tin can alarms I'd strung along likely approach paths. Each consisted of a taut cord tied to a few empty cans and scrap metal, rattling when disturbed, crude, but they made enough noise for me to hear. A can jangled behind me without warning, not the soft tinkle of wind, but a sharp, sustained rattle. I froze, pivoting slowly. My hand went to the rifle automatically, but I kept it lowered. Noise attracted attention. Shooting should be a last resort. "Easy," a voice called, somewhere beyond the trees. Male, strained but steady, not slurred. "I see you. I'm not sick." "Stop where you are," I said. I stepped behind a trunk for partial cover, hands where I can see them. The man stepped into view about 20 yards away. He wore a faded canvas jacket, dirty jeans, and a cap with the logo of a regional trucking company. A hunting pack was slung over one shoulder. In his right hand, pointed at the ground, was a lever-action rifle. At least he had the sense not to wave it around. He slowly raised his left hand, then set the rifle down carefully and raised his right as well. "There," he said. "I'm just trying not to walk into another nest. You alone up here?" "Who's asking?" I countered. "Name's Cole. Used to run loads between here and Virginia. Got stuck near Beverly when everything went bad. Worked my way up slope when the roads turned into a parking lot. I've been watching this patch from the ridge for 2 days. If you've been at the ridge, then you know they don't come close," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, I saw a group go right past within a couple 100 yards last night. 10, maybe 15 of them. They hit that line of rocks and just shifted. Like a flock that changed course. Walked around. Didn't even slow down. But they didn't look toward this clearing once." My grip on the rifle tightened. "So why are you here?" "Because that doesn't happen by accident," he replied. "I knew someone had to be at the center of it, or something. Figured if it was a person, they might shoot me, but at least they'd talk first. The other option out there is just staying in the trees until I run out of food." He watched me closely, eyes tracking every small movement. "Look," he said, "if you want me to walk away, I'll walk. I've done it before. But we both know how thin one person's margin is in a place like this. You must have read the notebooks by now. Harper's right." That caught me off guard. "You knew Harper?" "I met them once, right after things started going public," Cole said. "They came down near the road to trade for fuel. Nice person, smart, tired. Said they were working on something up in the woods. Said if things went really bad, there'd be a place where the rules were different. Didn't tell me exactly where, but I paid attention. When I saw how that group moved last night, I put it together." He looked past me, toward the hint of clearing through the trees. "So, are you inviting me in or sending me away?" I thought about it. I ran through possibilities in my head. If I turned him away, he might camp just outside the zone out of stubbornness. If he stayed there, he could attract attention, and whatever protection this place offered might not matter if the numbers grew too large. If I let him in, I risked sharing limited resources with an unknown, but he was armed, aware, and had bothered to approach cautiously instead of charging in. "Pick up the rifle, but keep it pointed down," I said finally. "We'll talk inside. You can leave it by the door until we get a sense of each other." He smiled a little, a tired, crooked expression. Fair enough. We walked back to the cabin together, 6 or 7 yards apart. I watched his stride, his breathing, the way he moved. No staggering, no glassy stare, no fresh wounds that I could see. He looked exhausted, but not sick. Inside, I had him sit at the table and set his rifle on the floor beside his chair. I kept mine leaning against the wall within reach. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. I heated some water on the propane stove and made us both instant coffee from a jar I'd found in the cupboard. The smell alone made my shoulders relax a little. It was a small reminder of how things used to be. "So," he said, wrapping his hands around the mug, "how long you been here?" "Since the first big alert," I replied. "About a week and a half. I was a utility lineman in Elkins. When things started happening, I headed into the forest instead of trying to push through town. Found this place by accident." "Nothing with this place is an accident," Cole said quietly. "You noticed that yet?" "I read Harper's notes," I answered. "I've heard them. The people who changed. They pass by but never enter. I've marked where they avoid. It lines up with their drawings." Cole nodded slowly. "I've been moving in a big arc for days," he said. "Whenever I get near those zones, it's the same. They give it space. Not like they're scared. More like they just don't register it as a path. They'll walk right past a better route to take the harder one, as long as it keeps them outside the line." He took a sip of coffee and winced at the heat, then took another anyway. "This cabin," he continued, "Harper called it protected ground when they mentioned it, not in any mystical way, more like an anchor point in a pattern, the kind of place you don't mess with unless you want to see what happens when you break the pattern." "So you're here to what?" I asked. "Use it? Guard it? Take it?" He snorted softly. "If I wanted to take it, I wouldn't have rattled your tin cans and announced myself," he said. "I'm here because I don't want to die alone in a ditch, and because I've already seen what happens to safe spots when too many people find out about them. First they get loud, then they get crowded, then they get overrun." He looked me in the eye. "If we stay here, we have to agree on something. This place stays quiet. No big fires at night, no shouting, no signals that carry far. It's a blind spot for them. We don't fix that by plastering it on the sky." I thought about the empty truck at the chain gate, the crowds back in town, the way the infected voices had rolled through the forest like distant thunder. Quiet sounded good to me. "Fine," I said. "We keep it quiet. We keep it small." He nodded. "Good. Then we have a starting point." Over the next few days, we worked side by side, falling into a rhythm. Cole had a hunter's instincts and a trucker's knowledge of back roads. He showed me a better way to set up snares with fine wire he carried in his pack. I showed him how the cabin's solar system worked, how to check the charge controller and battery levels, and how to stretch limited power by using LED lights only when absolutely necessary. We split tasks naturally. I focused more on reinforcing structures, improving the trench, and building simple barricades that could be pulled into place quickly. He focused on mapping movement outside the perimeter, watching the ridges, and setting what he called early warnings, small bits of thread or strips of fabric at knee height along likely approach routes, so we could see if someone had passed through recently. We talked in short bursts. Neither of us had much energy for small talk. When we did, the conversations stayed practical. "How many people you seen since this started?" I asked once as we sat on the porch, each eating a bowl of rice with canned vegetables. "Enough," he said. "Too many going the same way, downhill, to towns. to supposed evacuation centres that stopped updating their status hours after they opened. I helped a couple of families get their cars unstuck from ditches. I saw some of them again later, on foot, and not themselves anymore. He took another bite, chewed slowly. You? Just you since I got here, I said. Saw some footprints and an old pack near a ravine. That's it. Before that, it was all from a distance. People running, people being chased. I didn't stop. I still think about that. Thinking about it means you're still worth having around, he answered. The ones who stop thinking, they're the ones you can't afford to be near. Our uneasy calm held for about a week. Then the pattern shifted. It started with the smell of smoke. Not the faint, clean smell of a small cooking fire, but the greasy scent of burning plastic and treated wood. It drifted through the trees late one afternoon, when I was on the far side of the perimeter, checking a line of alarms. I lifted my head and sniffed the air. The wind was light but steady, blowing from the direction of the old logging road downslope. Back at the cabin, Cole stood on the hill with a pair of compact binoculars raised to his eyes. I climbed up beside him. "Smoke," I said. "Yeah," he answered. He handed me the binoculars. "Edge of the old cut. See it?" I focused the lenses. Through a gap in the trees about half a mile away, I could make out a flicker of orange. The smoke rose in a lazy column, not high enough to suggest a major forest fire, but more than any cautious person would ever risk under these conditions. "Campfire," I said. "Too big." "Not just a campfire," Cole replied. "Listen." We both fell silent. Over the faint crackle, carried on the wind, came another sound. Voices, 4 or 5 at least, one louder than the rest, barking orders or arguments. The words were indistinct, but the tone was stressed and high. Once, someone gave a harsh, short laugh that sounded more like a release of tension than amusement. "They're inside the avoidance zone," I said quietly. "Too close for comfort." "Not yet," he answered. "They're right on the edge. Same line the groups keep skirting. But if they stay there and keep yelling, they're going to pull things in from every side." As if to prove his point, a distant sound rolled through the trees a few minutes later. That low, blended vocal noise I had heard before, only closer now. "Here we go," Cole muttered. Through the binoculars, I watched shapes moving at the periphery of the campfire light, stumbling at first, then converging. The people at the fire must have seen them too, because their voices shifted into panicked shouts. Someone fired a gun, a sharp, flat crack that echoed through the forest. "Idiot," Cole said softly. Sound and light, both cranked up. I lowered the binoculars. "What do we do?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "We stick to our rule," he said. "We keep the clearing quiet. If they break and run toward us, we deal with it then. But if we go charging out now, we're stepping outside the only advantage this place gives us." I did not like it, but he was right. Out there, we were on open ground. In here, we had at least some control. We listened as the situation unfolded. More shots, screaming, then a strange shift in the infected noise as if the group had split and was moving in 2 directions. Some of the sound moved away, down slope. Some drew nearer, along the invisible line I had marked with tree cuts. At one point, I caught movement through the trees. Figures running, weaving between trunks, pursued by others moving with that unnatural gait. The runners crossed the line of my marks at full speed. The infected chasing them slowed, clustered at the boundary, and paced, almost as if they were testing an invisible fence. One of the runners peeled off and darted directly toward our clearing. The others kept going parallel to the boundary, yelling back over shoulders, trying to draw their pursuers along a different path. It half worked. Some of the infected followed the main group. Others stayed at the edge of the avoidance zone, fixated on the direction the lone runner had taken. "They're heading straight for us," I said. Cole dropped the binoculars and grabbed his rifle. "Time's up," he said. "Let's see if Harper's lines hold under pressure." We moved quickly, but controlled. Down the hill, around the cabin, to the front where the path from the woods entered the clearing. I could hear someone crashing through the underbrush, Branches snapped, feet slipped, someone cursed under their breath. A figure burst out of the trees a moment later. A woman, maybe mid-30s, wearing a backpack and a jacket that had once been bright but was now torn and dirty. She stumbled, saw us, and froze. "That's far enough," Cole called. He kept his rifle down but ready. "You hurt?" She shook her head rapidly. Her eyes were wide, but her movements were coordinated. "No," she gasped. "No bites. Nothing like that. Please, they're right behind me. I saw you up there on the ridge. I saw the cabin. Please." I glanced past her. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the first line of my cuts, figures were assembling. 10 at least. 11. Their skin tones varied, their clothing a collection of torn jackets, workwear, and street clothes. All had that same fixed, hungry stare. They pressed forward until they reached an invisible line, then stopped. A few paced left and right, frustrated by something they could not understand. "How long since you left the others?" I asked. "Minutes," she said. They started arguing about which way to go. The fire was bringing more of them. I ran when the first ones broke through. I heard them behind me. "Please, if you're going to turn me away, do it fast. I'm not going back out there." Cole and I exchanged a look, his jaw clenched. "One more inside the zone won't break it," he said quietly. "But if we keep taking people, it's going to change." "I know," I replied, "but we're not going to leave her out here with them." Harper didn't either. I stepped back and jerked my head toward the door. "Get inside," I told her. "We'll talk more once we have the door closed." She did not hesitate. She sprinted the short distance to the porch, stumbled on the first step, caught herself, and shoved the door open. I heard her drop her pack on the floor and lean against the wall, breathing hard. We stayed outside for another minute, watching the infected. One of them took a few steps forward, as if testing the boundary. Its foot hit the shallow trench I had dug. It lost balance, windmilled its arms, and fell forward. For a second, I thought it might tumble fully into the clearing. Instead, it stopped right at the edge, body half in, half out of the avoidance zone. It lay there, limbs twitching weakly. The others reacted in a way I had not seen before. Rather than swarming, they recoiled slightly, shifting their weight backward, their expressions tight. One reached out cautiously and grabbed the fallen one's arm, then gave a sharp pull, dragging the body back out of the trench with a surprising amount of coordinated strength. Once it was fully outside, the group seemed to relax. They turned in near unison and began to move along the line, pacing the boundary, following the direction the other runners had gone. "Did you see that?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," Cole said. "They really don't want to cross." We watched until they were out of sight, their noise fading into the distance. Back inside, the woman had taken a seat at the table. She watched us like someone who expected bad news at any moment. "You two live here?" she asked. "We live here for now," I said. "Name's Ethan. This is Cole." "Lena," she replied. "I was with a group from Parsons. We headed into the forest when the towns got bad. Made it this far. Thought we hit a good spot last night. Flat ground, water nearby. Didn't realize how close we were to their path until it was too late." "You left them," Cole said. There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement. "They told me to," she answered. 3 stayed to draw them out. They had most of the guns, said someone had to break away and try to find a better place. I don't know if they believed they'd get away or if they just didn't want all of us caught together. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. She pinned them under her thighs to still them. "You saw the way they stopped at the trees," she added. "I've never seen that. Everywhere else, they just keep coming if they see or hear you. This place is different," I said. "We don't know exactly why." Harper had theories, but nothing confirmed. "Harper?" she asked. "The person who was here before us," Cole explained. "Scientist, careful, smarter than either of us. They worked out that this patch is in some kind of blind spot for the infected. They don't cross in, even when they're chasing." "Is it safe?" she asked. "Really?" "It's safer," I answered honestly. "That's all we can say. There's no such thing as safe anymore." but we'll do what we can to keep it that way. We laid out the rules for her that night. No fire outside after dark, no shouting, no unnecessary light, no wandering beyond the marked trees alone. If she felt sick, fever, confusion, anything, she had to tell us immediately. She nodded, accepting each point without protest. "I worked as a nurse's aide," she said quietly. "I know what happens if people wait too long to admit there's a problem." We made up a second bed for her in the bunk room, using spare blankets. Cole opted to sleep in a hammock he rigged in the main room, near the door. I took first watch by the front window, shutters cracked just enough to give out a line of sight. In the early hours of the morning, when the forest was at its coldest and quietest, I heard the infected again. This time, the sound came from two directions at once, then converged. It stopped at the line of my marked trees and moved sideways, like water deflected by a rock. At one point, I saw two figures standing just beyond the first trunks, staring towards the cabin. They stood there for a long time, motionless except for small twitches, as if they could sense something but could not reconcile it with their limited understanding. Eventually, they turned and walked away. Days passed. We adjusted to having 3 people in a space built for one. It was not comfortable, but it was bearable. The workload divided more ways, made some things easier. Lena helped with food prep, inventory, and finer work, like repairing torn clothing and patching gear. Her hands were steady when she was focused on tasks, her training in crowded hospital wards, giving her a calm under pressure that we appreciated. The strain came from scarcity and philosophy, not personality. "We can't keep this to just us forever," Lena said one evening as we sat around the table. "There are other people out there. Good people. Families. If this place can protect more than 3 people, don't we have some responsibility to share it? If we spread the word too far, we turn it into exactly what we were trying to get away from," Cole countered. "Crowds, noise, arguments. You want kids running around the boundary line, playing as if this were a campground? Because that's what happens when people start thinking they found a safe place. There's a balance," she insisted. "We don't have to open the doors to everyone, but we can't pretend we're the only ones who deserve to live just because we found it first." I stayed quiet at first, listening to them. They were both right in different ways. Harper's final entries had called the cabin a resource, not a fortress, something to be managed carefully, a place that existed within a pattern we did not fully understand. "If we invite more people," I said finally, "we need more structure, rules, a clear understanding that this place stays quiet and controlled. That means we either become the ones enforcing those rules, or we hope that whoever shows up will enforce them for us." "And you know that never happens," Cole said. "If I've learned anything in 30 years on the road, it's that the tightest ship falls apart when too many new people climb aboard and start pushing their own priorities. We can start small," Lena countered. "1 or 2 more, people we choose, ones who can contribute, not children at first. That gives us time to see how the zone handles more human activity." "How do you propose we find them?" I asked. "We can't exactly put up a sign by the old logging road." She looked down at Harper's shortwave radio, which she had been tinkering with in her spare time. It sat on the shelf, connected to a makeshift antenna that ran up through a gap near the roof. "We listen first," she said. "We see who's talking. If there's anyone still broadcasting locally, we hear what they sound like. We look for people who are staying calm, using clear language, not just yelling for help. Maybe we call back once or twice, carefully, without giving exact locations, and see how they respond. It's a risk," Cole said. "So is staying here until we run out of supplies and options," she replied. "At least this way, we approach it on our terms." I thought about the empty highways, the abandoned cars, the people I had driven past on my way to the forest. I thought about Harper's blood on the rocks and their note to whoever followed. "Treat this place as a resource, not a battleground." "Okay," I said. "We try listening. We don't transmit right away. And when we do, we keep it vague. No coordinates, no landmarks, just enough to gauge who's out there. That night, as the forest noise rose and faded beyond our invisible boundary, the three of us sat around the shortwave radio, turning the dial slowly through static and broken signals. Most of what we heard was noise, fragments of distant conversations, emergency frequencies repeating automated messages long after anyone was left to update them, bursts of unreadable static. Once, we caught a distant station playing music on a loop, likely from a generator-powered facility far away. Then, late into the night, a clear voice cut through. If anyone in Randolph or Tucker County can hear this, we're at the old quarry outside of Parsons. We have a small group, food for now, water from the spring. We have injured people though, and we're running low on medicine. Please, if anyone is near, respond. If you're not, just know we're still here. The speaker sounded tired but composed. No shaking hysteria, no demands. Just a factual statement of their situation and a simple appeal glimmering under it. Lena looked at me, then at Cole. "I know what you're going to say," she whispered, "but just think about it. A quarry is open ground, no natural boundary. If they're near here, they're exposed. We might not be able to bring them all in, but we might be able to bring one or two, or at least teach them about the patterns." Cole stared at the radio, jaw tight. "You start inviting quarry people in, word gets around," he said. "You go from 3 to 10 to 30 in a hurry." "Not if we control it," she insisted. "Not if we decide what we share and what we keep. The infected already have a pattern. If we pretend we can survive by ignoring everyone else, we're building a tiny island around a wildfire." I understood his worry. I also understood hers. In the end, we did not decide that night. We listened until our eyes blurred, then shut off the radio and went to sleep in shifts, minds full of voices and the rustle of unseen movement beyond the tree line. In the morning, when the light returned and the clearing looked like any other forgotten patch of forest, we resumed our tasks. We checked the trench, tightened the rope alarms, and split wood. We moved quietly, aware that every sound carried meaning now. Living in that cabin taught me something the old world had never pushed me to learn. Survival was not just about barricades and food stores and weapons. It was about patterns, the way noise moved through trees, the way human behavior repeated under stress, the way a forgotten cabin in the woods could become both shield and trap, depending on how you used it. The infected gave the clearing a wide berth, whether from scent, sound, or some unseen factor. The living, on the other hand, were drawn toward any hint of safety like metal to a magnet. The cabin stood at the intersection of those two forces, and we were caught between them. We were not heroes, we were not villains. We were three people who had found a place the dead did not want and the living desperately needed, trying to decide how much of it to keep and how much to share. I do not know how long the quiet zone will last. Patterns change. The infected learn. Humans adapt, for better or worse. What I do know is that every night, when I sit by the shuttered window and hear them moving in the distance, they still stop at the line of my marked trees. They still turn away, pacing back into the depths of the forest as if something about that cabin and the ground beneath it does not exist for them. And every night, when the radio crackles with distant voices calling out into the dark, we turn the dial and listen, trying to decide which noise is more dangerous, the sound of the dead searching for what they can't understand, or the sound of the living asking for a place to stand. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.